ridiculous or ridiculously comfortable. Some cars push the limits of stupidity, while others redefine luxury. From laughably bad designs to the pinnacle of comfort, these 12 cars will leave you stunned. You've never seen anything like this. I remember the first time I saw it. It was parked right in front of the dealership, a monument of excess, gleaming under the afternoon sun. It wasn't just big, it was massive. Stretching nearly 19 feet from end to end, its black paint deep and glossy like a grand piano, its vinyl top perfectly fitted like a tailored suit. The chrome trim caught the light just right, the hood ornament stood proudly at the front, and the opera lights along the sides promised an experience unlike anything else on the road. I had driven Cadillacs before, but this one was different. The salesman barely needed to sell it to me. The moment I opened the door, I knew I was stepping into something special. The seats weren't just plush, they were the thickest, softest, most indulgent things I had ever seen in a car. Not leather, not cloth, but deep, rich Medici-crushed velour, so luxurious that you practically sank into it. They weren't ordinary seats either. This wasn't a car meant to carry 6 people like a normal Cadillac. No, this one had individual captain's chairs in both the front and back, separated by the longest center console I had ever seen. It ran the full length of the interior, housing a fold-out writing desk, a storage compartment, and even a little slot for a Cadillac-branded pen and notepad. Because, of course, if you owned a car like this, you needed a place to jot down your thoughts while being chauffeured around town. I slid behind the wheel and let my hands rest on the thick, padded steering wheel. The dashboard stretched wide, trimmed in wood grain, chrome, and soft-touch materials. Every surface designed to make sure you knew you were in something expensive. The carpet was so thick you could lose a set of keys in it. The door panels had extra padding, as if Cadillac didn't trust the seats alone to keep you comfortable. The whole interior felt more like a lounge than a car, the kind of place where important business decisions were made, deals were closed, and expensive cigars were smoked. When I turned the key, the massive 500 cubic inch V8 rumbled to life, smooth and quiet, barely making a sound inside the cabin. It didn't roar, didn't bark, didn't demand attention. It just purred, confident in its own presence. The throttle response was slow and deliberate, not because the engine lacked power, but because this car wasn't in a hurry. It moved with purpose, gliding onto the road like a yacht leaving the harbor. The suspension soaked up bumps as if they didn't exist. The body floated over imperfections, and the steering was so light you could turn it with a single finger. Driving it felt less like piloting a car and more like commanding a ship. You didn't dart in and out of traffic. You sailed down the boulevard, the hood stretching out in front of you like the bow of an ocean liner. Changing lanes required careful planning, parking was a calculated maneuver, and making a U-turn was an event in itself. But that was part of the experience. It wasn't about convenience, it was about making a statement. Of course, it had its flaws. Gas mileage was laughable, 8 miles per gallon on a good day, maybe 6 if you had a heavy foot. The size made it a challenge in tight spaces, and the sheer weight of the thing meant that acceleration was more of a gradual suggestion than an immediate response. But none of that mattered. This wasn't a car for practical people. It was a car for those who wanted something more, something bigger, something unapologetically luxurious. I kept that car for years, and in all that time, it never failed to turn heads. People would stop me at gas stations, in parking lots, at stoplights, just to ask about it. Some recognized it instantly. Others had never seen one before and just wanted to know what kind of spaceship I was driving. It had a presence that modern cars simply don't have anymore. Eventually, practicality caught up with me. A growing family, changing priorities, and the inevitable reality of maintenance costs forced me to let it go. But to this day, I've never owned another car that felt quite the same. Luxury today is about technology, about touchscreens and efficiency. But back then, luxury meant something different. It meant size, comfort, presence. It meant gliding down the road in a rolling parlor, surrounded by more velour than an upscale Vegas casino, feeling like you were on top of the world. If I ever find another one, in good condition, I won't hesitate, because cars like that don't come around often. And once you've owned one, no other car ever feels quite as special again. I still remember the first time I laid eyes on it. There it was, parked at the end of a long driveway, its massive chrome grille gleaming in the sunlight, looking less like a car and more like something that had escaped from a 1950s dream sequence. It was a 1958 Buick Limited, a machine so vast, so unapologetically excessive, that it made everything around it seem small by comparison. Even standing next to it was an experience. This wasn't just a big car, it was a behemoth, stretching nearly 19 feet from nose to tail. The front end looked like a rolling cathedral of chrome, the sweep spear body lines, accentuating its endless proportions. And the rear? Those massive fin taillights looked like jet thrusters, as if Buick engineers had been this close to making it fly. Everything about it was exaggerated, the chrome trim, the sculpted fenders, the intricate badging. Buick didn't hold back in 1958. This was their halo car. And they built it like they had a blank check and a mandate for excess. The moment I opened the door, I knew I was in for something special. The first thing that hit me was the smell of old leather and polished wood, the unmistakable scent of a time when car interiors were built to feel like upscale living rooms. And that's exactly what this was. A rolling lounge, complete with deep cushioned seats that felt more like furniture from a high-end parlor than anything you'd find in a car today. The floor was covered in thick, plush carpeting, the kind that made you feel guilty stepping on it with shoes. The dashboard was a masterpiece of chrome and symmetry, the kind of over-the-top styling that could only come from the late 50s. Every control, every switch, every power-operated gadget was designed to make you feel like you were piloting something far more advanced than a mere automobile. Power windows, power seats, power antenna, power steering, power brakes. If Buick could add a motor to it, they did. Driving it was an experience unlike any other. The moment I put it in gear, the massive, by 364 cubic inch nailhead V8 rumbled to life, sending a gentle vibration through the chassis. It wasn't loud or aggressive, it was smooth, deliberate. A gentle giant that didn't need to prove anything. The Dynaflow automatic transmission didn't shift gears so much as it flowed between them, giving the car a ride quality that felt like gliding on a cushion of air. On the highway, the Buick didn't drive, it floated. The coil spring suspension soaked up every imperfection, turning potholes into minor inconveniences and smoothing out rough roads with an elegance that modern cars can't quite replicate. It was never in a hurry, never rushed. It commanded the road, not with speed, but with presence. Of course, it wasn't exactly easy to maneuver. Parking it was an event in itself. I learned quickly that you don't park a 1958 Buick Limited, you dock it, like a ship coming into port. The turning radius was comparable to that of a city bus, and fitting it into a normal parking space? Forget it. If there weren't at least 2 open spots available, I wasn't even going to try. And the fuel economy? Well, let's just say it drank gasoline, with the thirst of a man lost in the desert. The big V8 wasn't particularly powerful by modern standards, 300 horsepower, but it had mountains of torque, enough to get this 2.5-ton beast rolling with effortless grace. But efficiency? That wasn't even in the conversation. But here's the thing, I never cared. Every time I took it out, people stared, they smiled, they asked questions. What year is it? How long is that thing? Is it hard to drive? Kids pointed, old-timers reminisced, and complete strangers struck up conversations at gas stations. That's what made it special. It wasn't just a car, it was an experience. A piece of history. A reminder of a time when American automakers weren't afraid to build something truly extravagant. I don't drive it every day, but when I do, I remember exactly why I fell in love with it. It's absurd, it's impractical, and it's completely over the top. And that's exactly why I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'll never forget the first time I saw it. There it was, sitting like some kind of rolling throne, shimmering under the sun with its mile-long chrome trim and those unmistakable freestanding headlights, perched on their own little pedestals, as if Chrysler's designers were trying to outdo every luxury car on the road. And maybe they were. This was a 1961 Imperial Crown Southampton. A car so unapologetically extravagant that it made contemporary Cadillacs look restrained. The moment I ran my hand along its sculpted fenders, I knew this wasn't just a car. It was a statement. The kind of car a Frank Sinatra or some high-rolling executive would have stepped out of. The kind of machine that commanded attention, whether it was moving or parked. The swivel seats were the first sign that I was in for something special. I pulled the chrome handle and, like magic, the entire front seat rotated outward, making it effortless to slide into place. No awkward climbing in, no bending down, just a smooth, dignified entrance. If you were wearing a suit, you stayed looking sharp. If you were in a gown, no fabric got bunched up. Chrysler really thought of everything. Inside, it felt less like a car and more like a first-class cabin on an ocean liner. The dashboard was a work of art, covered in polished aluminum, fine leather, and enough push-button controls to make you feel like you were launching a spaceship. The square steering wheel was unlike anything else I'd ever seen, more of a sculpture than a functional object. And the torpedo-like gauge cluster sat behind it, bathed in soft indirect lighting. It didn't just look luxurious, it looked futuristic. And then there were the door panels, stitched and padded with such detail that they could have belonged in a private club. The gun sight taillights of Outback, those were a pure jet-age styling, like Chrysler had stolen them off a fighter jet and stuck them onto this 19-foot Boulevard cruiser. Even the Imperial Eagle hood ornament, stretched proudly over the front grille, made it clear this wasn't just any luxury car. I turned the key, and the 413 cubic inch V8 rumbled to life with an effortless, almost regal hum. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it was dignified. A massive, torque-rich motor that didn't need to announce itself. The push-button transmission was another marvel. No clunky shifter, no unnecessary movements, just a set of buttons on the dash. Select drive, and off you go. And the ride, unreal. Chrysler's a torsion bar suspension, soaked up bumps so well that it felt like gliding across the pavement on a cloud. I'd heard people say you could balance a cup of coffee on the dash and never spill a drop. I laughed until I tried it. They weren't kidding. Maneuvering it through city streets was an event. The hood stretched out like the deck of an aircraft carrier. In parallel parking, you didn't park an Imperial, you saw negotiated real estate. The car owned the road, floating effortlessly, never rushed, never hurried. It wasn't about getting somewhere fast, it was about arriving with style. Of course, there were quirks. The fuel economy was abysmal, around 9 miles per gallon on a good day. And if you weren't paying attention, the swivel seats could surprise unsuspecting passengers when they stepped out. And let's not forget the sheer size. If you weren't careful, you'd find yourself taking up 2 lanes without realizing it. But none of that mattered. Every time I drove it, people stared. Some pointed, some smiled. Older folks would stop me at gas stations and tell me stories of how they used to see these cars back in the day. It wasn't just transportation. It was an experience, a piece of history, a machine built not just for getting somewhere, but for making sure everyone knew you had arrived. I've owned a lot of cars over the years, but few have made me feel quite like this one. And if I ever find another, I won't hesitate, Because once you've driven something like a 1961 Imperial, nothing else ever quite measures up. I'll never forget the first time I saw it. There it sat, parked like some kind of rolling mansion, its immense chrome grille reflecting the sun in such a way that you couldn't help but take notice. The 1907 Lincoln Continental Mark V wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a bold declaration of luxury and size, as if to say, if you're going to make a luxury coupe, make it the biggest and most opulent thing on the road. And let me tell you, it succeeded. At 19 feet long, this car was a beast, and the sheer expanse of it could overwhelm you. Just standing next to it, you realized you were dealing with something more akin to a small yacht on wheels. It wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was about creating a presence wherever it went. Those freestanding headlights on either side of the massive hood, the opera windows on the rear side panels, these were all features designed to make you feel like royalty as you cruise through the streets. It looked like a car built for people who never had to worry about traffic, parking, or fuel prices. Opening the door felt like stepping into another world. The moment you slid inside, you were enveloped in comfort. The seats were softer than anything I had ever sat in, almost like sinking into a luxurious living room couch. It wasn't just plush, it was over-the-top indulgence. The velour upholstery seemed to have been chosen with the sole purpose of making you feel like you were floating in an endless cloud. And that Cartier clock in the center of the dashboard wasn't just a timepiece. It was a subtle, yet constant reminder of the car's lavishness. This wasn't just a dashboard, it was a throne room for the driver and passenger. What truly set the Mark V apart, though, was the little things, the opera windows, that quirky touch that no one really needed, but Chrysler insisted you should have. They were there just to remind you that you were driving something special, something that cared more about style than practicality. And the dashboard, complete with its impressive array of buttons and switches, was an engineering feat in itself. It looked like something straight out of a spaceship. Just push a button, and the car did the work for you. The push-button transmission was almost otherworldly in its simplicity, like stepping into a car that felt like it had been designed for the future, not the past. When I first started the car, it wasn't with the roar of a sports car, nor was there any grand fanfare. The engine, a 460 cubic inch V8, simply hummed to life. It wasn't about power for the sake of speed, it was more like a gentle rumble, a warning that you were in something that could go the distance, not race to the finish line. But with just 208 horsepower, it wasn't exactly quick off the line. And honestly, it didn't need to be. The car was all about presence, about commanding the road with its sheer size and comfort. Getting from 0 to 60 wasn't the point. Driving it was unlike anything I'd experienced before. The torsion bar suspension made every bump in the road feel like it was being absorbed by a soft cushion of air, giving the ride an almost hovercraft-like quality. The car glided effortlessly, making even rough city streets feel like smooth highways. I once tried balancing a cup of coffee on the dashboard, and to my surprise, it stayed perfectly still, never spilling a drop. The ride was just that smooth. But then came the reality of owning something so massive. Parking was a whole new experience because you didn't just park a Mark V, you had to find a place big enough for it. The car was so long and wide that you had to start thinking in terms of 2 parking spaces, not just one. Parallel parking? Forget it. I often had to find an open lot just to make sure I didn't end up with a scratched door. And when you drove through narrow streets, you quickly realized how monumental this thing really was. Fuel economy, of course, was a joke. With its V8 engine, this car didn't care much about efficiency. I could practically see the gas gauge drop as I drove. But honestly, I didn't mind, because when you were behind the wheel of a 1977 Lincoln Continental Mark V, fuel economy felt like a distant concern. It was more about the experience, the way it made you feel like you were in a world of your own, cruising down the highway with the windows down and the world admiring your car as it passed by. And it wasn't just the ride or the features, it was the attention. Everywhere I went, people stopped. They stared. I got nods from older gentlemen who had lived through the golden age of American automobiles and told me stories of how they used to see these cars on the road when they were young. The Mark V wasn't just a car, it was a living, breathing piece of history, one that turned heads every time it rolled through the streets. Sure, it was big, impractical, and absurdly thirsty for gas, but that was exactly what made it special. The 1980 Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow II wasn't just a car, it was a lesson in how to be ridiculously dignified. If you ever wanted to drive something that made you feel like a king, while you casually brushed off the realities of the world, this was it. Rolls-Royce, as they were known to do, took luxury to a level that bordered on the absurd, and the Silver Shadow II was a prime example of this engineering excess. Let's start with the suspension system. Rolls-Royce decided that you shouldn't just drive on the road. No, that would be beneath you. You should float above it, gliding smoothly over bumps, potholes, or any imperfections like they simply didn't exist. Enter the hydropneumatic suspension, a system so advanced, so complex, that it could smooth out even the roughest of roads and confuse the heck out of anyone who tried to repair it. Imagine every time you hit a bump, it was like your car was saying, "Don't worry, I got this." But here's the thing, this incredible suspension, though luxurious, wasn't quite so practical. The hydraulic systems that powered it were intricate, and they required the kind of knowledge that went beyond your average mechanic's scope. Even highly trained professionals would often be left scratching their heads, trying to figure out why the system decided to have a hiccup. One thing was for sure, maintenance could be a nightmare. It wasn't just about replacing a shock or adjusting a strut. No, this was a deep dive into Rolls-Royce wizardry, requiring you to trust in experts who truly understood the complexity of the system. And if that weren't enough, the brakes on the Silver Shadow II came with their own mystique, and they didn't operate like your standard brake system. Instead, Rolls-Royce designed high-pressure hydraulic brakes, which could confuse even the most seasoned professionals when it came time for servicing. The sheer complexity of the braking system was designed to give you the smoothest, most refined stop possible, but when something went wrong, it often left mechanics swearing under their breath. But let's not get too bogged down in the technicalities. After all, this was a Rolls-Royce, and the experience of driving it was far more important than anything else. The moment you settled into the deeply plush leather seats, you immediately knew this was no ordinary car. This wasn't just about getting point A to point B. It was about the journey itself, which in the Silver Shadow II felt like stepping into a personal palace on wheels. The wood trim, exquisite. The leather, luxurious beyond belief. So soft you felt like you were sitting in a seat made entirely of clouds. And don't even get me started on the interior space. There was enough legroom and headroom for two people to comfortably lounge without ever feeling cramped. You weren't just driving a car, you were commanding a iron space of refinement that offered unparalleled comfort, like it was designed to make every trip feel like a vacation. Once you started driving, the road beneath you vanished, and you became the king of your kingdom, looking down at the commoners in their humble sedans. The Guangdiaish V8 engine was smooth, with just enough power to let you glide through the streets without breaking a sweat. No one cared about acceleration or 0 to 60 times in a Rolls-Royce. It was all about effortless cruising, where speed was secondary to presence and power. When you accelerated, it felt as though you were gliding, not driving, a sensation of absolute calm. But the real charm of the Silver Shadow II came from its almost absurd attention to detail. Everything about the car seemed to scream luxury in the most understated way possible. Every switch, every dial, every piece of trim felt meticulously crafted with the intention of making you feel like royalty. You didn't just drive the car, you were the car. Of course, there were moments when the sheer complexity of the car became more of a hindrance than a joy. There were times when the old-school electronics and hydraulic systems would require specialized parts, and the experience of trying to source a replacement would leave you wondering if perhaps you should just keep the car in the garage, admiring its opulence from afar. But that's the thing. The 1980 Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow 2 wasn't just a car, it was an exercise in indulgence. It wasn't meant to make sense. It wasn't designed to be easy to maintain or repair. It wasn't meant to appeal to practicality. What it offered, however, was an experience unlike anything else on the road. To own the Silver Shadow 2 was to own a piece of automotive history, a car that straddled the line between absurdity and excellence, offering a level of refinement that could only be rivaled by the most opulent palaces. It was a balm masterpiece of engineering that the 1975 Oldsmobile 98 Regency wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a bold move into the land of excess and comfort with a dash of quirky novelty. The kind of car that made you think, why not have it all? And by all, I mean a pillow-soft ride, an over-the-top interior, and the first ever factory-installed CB radio. That's right, a CB radio, factory-installed, turning every trip into an opportunity to chat like a trucker while cruising in absolute plushness. Now let's talk about that CB radio for a second. Imagine, if you will, rolling down the highway, hands relaxed on the wheel, and suddenly you're engaging in a conversation with the world around you. Not with your passengers, but with truckers, fellow drivers, and anyone else who happened to be on the airwaves. You didn't need to stop at a gas station to strike up a conversation with some rugged trucker. No, you just hit the sour talk button, and you were instantly part of a network of long-distance travelers. This car was like a mobile ham radio, designed to make you feel connected in the most unlikely way. It was a feature that perfectly matched the car's warm, eccentric personality, luxury with a side of the trucker charm. And then there was the interior. If you've ever wondered what it would feel like to sit on a cloud, the 98 Regency probably got you pretty close. The button-tufted velour seats didn't just look soft, they were soft. Almost like sitting on a bed of marshmallows. You could practically sink into them. Every trip felt like being wrapped in a blanket of comfort, and if you closed your eyes, you might just forget you were even driving. Thick, plush velour covered every surface. Seats, door panels, headliner, you name it. It was an experience of indulgence. So heavy that you could almost hear the seat cushions whispering, "Let go of all your worries, we've got you." Now, despite its luxurious aura, the Oldsmobile 98 Regency was no sports car. The ride was effortless, sure, but handling was more of an afterthought. At a whopping 5,200 pounds, this car wasn't exactly built for tight corners or quick maneuvers. The weight made it feel more like you were driving a tank than a car, and that became especially evident when you tried to take a turn with any real speed. The suspension, while comfortable, had some floaty quality. It was a no-rush kind of car, one that just wanted you to lean back, relax, and coast through life. Acceleration was another feature that showed off this car's luxury over speed philosophy. With a Wesh 455 V8 under the hood, it was certainly no slouch when it came to power, but you didn't feel the urge to floor it. This wasn't about racing from stoplight to stoplight. This was about cruising, gently pressing the pedal, and gliding through the streets. The engine produced enough torque to move the hefty machine without much effort, but the goal wasn't to feel the road. It was to feel untouchable, like the road existed solely for your comfort. The exterior? Oh, it was big. It was a grand machine. All chrome and sharp edges, dominating the road with its imposing presence. The long body, the classic Oldsmobile grille, and those wide wheel arches told everyone that this car was not here to blend in. It was meant to be seen, to be admired. However, it wasn't all about flaunting. The ride quality was the real star. It was the epitome of American luxury, where practicality took a backseat to comfort. The Oldsmobile 98 Regency wasn't a car designed to whip around corners or show off at a racetrack. It was designed for those who wanted to feel like they were floating, gently swaying through life's troubles, in a massive, plush, and well-appointed cocoon. But as with most cars of its size and era, the fuel economy wasn't exactly the car's strong point. With a big V8 and a hefty frame, it wasn't shy about sucking down gas. And at a time when fuel prices were on the rise, it became a bit of a joke among those who had to keep it running. But it was part of the package, the price you paid for indulgence and comfort. Despite all its quirks, the Oldsmobile 98 Regency was incredibly iconic. It was as much about the experience as it was about the drive. From the button-tufted velour seats to the stupidity radio that made you feel like you were in the middle of a cross-country trucking convoy, it was a car that represented a moment in time when luxury and novelty collided in the most absurd yet charming way. It wasn't perfect, but that was part of its charm. It was a car that took itself seriously, without ever really taking itself seriously. The 1959 Ford Thunderbird, affectionately known as the Square Bird, is the kind of car that defines glorious absurdity in automotive history. At a time when personal luxury cars were becoming more and more refined, Ford decided to take a bold step and make a car that was bigger, bolder, and even more ostentatious than what anyone expected. The result? A car that was so over the top, it felt more like a luxury yacht on wheels than anything else. Let's start with the sheer size of the thing. When Ford set out to redesign the Thunderbird for 1959, they decided that bigger was better. And by bigger, I mean they turned what was supposed to be a sleek, personal luxury car into a vehicle that weighed as much as a full-size sedan. This wasn't just a luxury car, it was a land yacht. At over 4,000 pounds, the Thunderbird was a behemoth that made you wonder if Ford had accidentally swapped it with a Buick or Cadillac halfway through the design process. The suspension? Soft, pillowy, like something you'd expect from a car designed to absorb bumps and ruts like a sponge. It was perfect for soaking up the road's imperfections. But here's the problem. The top-heavy nature of the car made everything feel like you were navigating a massive boat in a storm. Imagine trying to steer a ship in high seas. Every turn felt like you were about to tip over. And the soft suspension, while comfortable on straight roads, left you fighting to keep the car on course as you entered even the slightest curve. The cornering? Let's just say it was a battle between the Kim and the laws of physics. You weren't just turning, you were sailing, as if the car were a cruise ship navigating through choppy waters. But despite this unwieldy handling, the interior was pure luxury. Ford didn't hold back when it came to comfort. You had a plush and pillowy soft interior, with seats that could swallow you whole, giving you a sense of being enveloped in cloud-like softness as you cruised along. The one dashboard was a work of art, with clean, wide dials, a touch of chrome, and a general feel of luxury that made you forget about the fact that you could probably fit a small family inside the trunk. Let's talk about the design. This thing was bold, brash, and unmistakable. The rear tail fins, reaching for the sky like some sort of futuristic airplane, made sure that no one ever missed the Square Bird on the road. It was an aggressive, almost cartoonish look, and Ford was unapologetic about it. The long, sleek lines of the car, with its bold chrome accents in the huge grille, made it clear that this car was all about making a statement. It wasn't just another car on the road, it was a rolling monument to excess. Powering the Thunderbird was a 352 cubic inch V8, which gave it the muscle to match its size. The engine was certainly capable, but the sheer size and weight of the car meant that it didn't exactly have the own nimbleness or agility you might expect from a true sports car. Instead, you had a more laid-back, relaxed driving experience, one where speed was secondary to show comfort and grandeur. But what really made the 19 1959 Thunderbird's standout was the Brougham overall experience. This wasn't a car that begged you to race or challenge the corners. It was a car that wanted you to take your time, glide down the road and show off. It was built for cruising, for driving with style and panache. With its massive size, dramatic tail fins, and the unmistakable power that came from underneath the hood, the Thunderbird was one of those cars that demanded your attention, whether you liked it or not. In the end, the Boss Squarebird may have been a bit impractical, but that was part of its charm. It wasn't a car that was meant to be driven hard or pushed to its limits. Instead, it was a rolling statement of luxury, style, and yes, ridiculousness. It was a car that made no apologies for being excessive and bold. And that was precisely what made it so wonderfully stupid. The 1959 Ford Thunderbird might have been a bit too much for some, but for those who embraced it, it was a timeless icon of automotive indulgence. The 1971 Mercedes-Benz 600 W100 wasn't just a car, it was a statement on wheels, a massive rolling fortress of luxury, built specifically for the ultra-wealthy political elites and some rather unsavory figures in history. If you were a dictator or just someone who had an endless supply of cash, this was the car you drove to let everyone know that you had arrived and that you were in complete control. And when I say control, I mean complete, down to the finest detail, thanks to a suite of hydraulically operated systems that turned every function of the car into a spectacle of opulence. This car had hydraulics for everything: seats, windows, sunroof, even the trunk. Need to adjust the seat position? No problem. The car does it for you with a hydraulic system that's smoother than silk, making you feel like the car was almost reading your mind. Want to lower the window? Just press a button and watch as the window effortlessly glides down. No effort on your part. The sunroof? Hydraulic, of course, offering you a personalized sunbathing experience at the press of a button. And let's not forget about the trunk. Yes, it was also hydraulic, opening and closing with the touch of a button, adding to the drama of the car. This wasn't just about driving, it was about commanding the machine, becoming one with it in a way that only the ultra-wealthy could afford. But here's the catch. All that hydraulic technology that made everything feel like a scene out of a science fiction movie? Well, fast forward a few decades and those systems became an absolute nightmare to maintain. The W100 was an engineering marvel for its time, but keeping all those hydraulic systems in working order today means you'd better have a fat wallet. You're talking about 5-figure repair bills just to fix the hydraulics alone. If you want those smooth, button-activated luxuries to keep working, you'll need to hand over your bank account. And then some. Parts for these systems aren't exactly sitting around on every corner, and finding a mechanic who can work on such a complex system is like searching for a needle in a haystack. The result? The 100 went from being the height of sophistication to the ultimate test of your patience and wallet. But let's not dwell on the frustration of ownership and maintenance. When this car was in its prime, it was a masterpiece of luxury. Powered by a 6.3-liter V8 engine, the W100 didn't just move, it glided. The engine wasn't the most powerful thing on the road, but it didn't need to be. It was designed to let you cruise at imperial speeds, all while you were cushioned by that smooth hydraulic suspension, which practically made you feel like you were floating. The car's handling was deceptively nimble for something so large and luxurious, thanks to that suspension, making it feel like you were piloting a high-end luxury jet rather than driving a full-size sedan. The interior? Well, this was next-level luxury. Every surface was richly appointed, from the wooden trim to the leather seats. You were surrounded by the finest materials money could buy. Every detail felt like it had been crafted by hand, with tasteful chrome accents, and plush, deep pile carpets. It was a place you could spend hours in, just relaxing, feeling invincible. The seats were so comfortable they practically hugged you as you drove. This wasn't just a car, it was a mobile palace. A sanctuary on wheels designed to keep you cocooned in comfort as you were chauffeured from one destination to the next. But as with most luxury cars, especially ones made for people who don't have to worry about things like money or maintenance, the 1971 Mercedes-Benz 600 was a car of extremes. It was too much of a good thing. Hydraulics for everything? Sure, why not? A V8 engine that moved the car effortlessly? Naturally. Luxury beyond belief? Of course, the W100 embodied the ultimate in excess, so much so that the sheer amount of technology and luxury was almost ridiculous. It was the car for those who wanted to declare their wealth in a way that no one could ignore. In the end, the Mercedes-Benz 600 was a car designed for the ultra-elite, meant to showcase a level of power, luxury, and comfort that few people could even dream of. Sure, it was impractical for most, and the cost of maintaining it today is enough to make you think twice. But when it was on the road, it was the epitome of automotive prestige. It was more than a car, it was a symbol. And for those who owned one, it was a car that left a lasting impression of absolute opulence and exclusivity. The 1989 Cadillac Brougham d'Elegance was the epitome of 1980s luxury, and also quite possibly one of the most absurdly, lazily designed cars ever produced by a major manufacturer. Cadillac, in all its glory, took the pillow-top seat trend and pushed it to extremes, creating a car that was so comfortable it almost felt like you were driving a mobile bed. And I don't mean comfortable in the way modern luxury cars are, no. I mean soft, to the point of near absurdity. If you thought driving should feel like floating on a cloud, the Brougham was your dream come true. But therein lay the problem. Let's talk about the seats. First, these seats were absurdly plush, wrapped in luxurious leather, and so pillowy soft you felt like you could nap in them for hours without ever feeling the road. You could practically sink into them. And once you did, you didn't want to get out. It was the sort of ride that made you feel like the car was cradling you, like you were being swaddled in comfort. Cadillac wanted to offer was a supreme luxury, and they did in terms of comfort, but it was so overdone that after a while you couldn't help but wonder if they were designing a couch on wheels rather than a car. The Mercedes ride? Oh, it was smooth, all right. A soft, cushy, a cloud-like experience that made you feel like you were gliding across the road. But here's the catch. While the suspension made you feel like you were cruising over a fluffy carpet, the car's performance left much to be desired. The Brougham was powered by a 5.0-liter Oldsmobile V8, which at the time was about as far from a performance engine as you could get. The problem wasn't just that it had a modest engine, it was the fact that the 140 horsepower it produced felt like it was struggling to move the behemoth, 5,000-pound car at all. It was sluggish at best. You'd floor the accelerator and the car would eventually lumber forward. But it certainly wasn't going to win any races. Acceleration over there, more like a gentle crawl to wherever you were headed. But despite the fact that it couldn't accelerate to save its life, the Brougham d'Elegance wasn't about speed, it was about a luxury. And it certainly delivered in that department. Cadillac doubled down on every aspect of luxury, from the rich leather upholstery to the wood trim that covered every surface, creating a feeling of indulgence wherever you looked. The interior was built to be sumptuous, with every detail meant to pamper the driver and passengers. The back seats were especially designed for maximum comfort, almost like a private lounge on wheels, making you feel like royalty as you were driven to your next destination. And then there was the styling. The Brougham had a distinctive, all-classic Cadillac design that screamed luxury from every angle. The sleek, elongated body with its sharp lines and chrome accents told everyone you weren't just driving any old sedan. You were driving something that had been designed with gusto and prestige in mind. It wasn't flashy, but it was grand, and it certainly caught the eye of anyone who passed by. Despite its luxurious trappings, the 1989 Cadillac Brougham d'Elegance had some serious issues. The engine was underpowered, and the whole package felt more like a land yacht than a proper car. It could barely keep up with traffic, let alone give you that thrilling, powerful ride you might expect from a luxury car. And the hard ride comfort, as nice as it was, became almost a problem because it made the car feel like it wasn't even trying to perform. In a way, the Brougham d'Elegance was a paradox. It was supposed to be the ultimate luxury sedan, but it ended up being more about comfort than anything else, with a distinct lack of power and performance. If you were someone who wanted a car to just float along with you, feeling like you were being carried in the lap of luxury, then the Brougham was ideal. But if you wanted a car that could actually drive like it meant business, the Brougham was a disappointment. In the end, the 1989 Cadillac Brougham d'Elegance was a luxury car for those who valued comfort over anything else. It was about the grandeur, not speed. But when you take a car with, more comfort than it knows what to do with, and pair it with an engine that's about as exciting as a potato, you get a car that's stupidly luxurious, but comically slow. And that's what made it both ridiculous and wonderfully absurd, because it was more about the experience of luxury than the experience of driving. The 1967 Buick Electra 225 also known as the Deuce and a Quarter, was Buick's answer to those who wanted nothing less than a floating palace on the road. This car was all about comfort, and it delivered in spades. With a pillow-soft suspension, every bump, crack, or pothole was smoothed over like it didn't exist. Riding in the Electra 225 felt less like driving and more like drifting effortlessly across the waves of the road. But while the ride was nothing short of luxurious, the car's handling was an entirely different story. Let's talk about the suspension first. It was so soft that you felt like you were sitting on a cloud, swaying from side to side with every undulation of the road. The Electra 225 was designed to be a car of comfort, offering a luxury cruise rather than a sporty drive. It made no attempt at being nimble or agile. It was a rough floating lounge on wheels, ideal for long highway cruises, but less suited for anything resembling a quick turn or tight maneuvering. The suspension essentially took over the driving experience, making the car feel more like a cushioned yacht than a car. However, the suspension's fluffiness came at a high cost. With a Ford 30 cubic inch V8 engine and a curb weight of over 4,500 lbs, the Electra 225 was a beast in terms of size and weight. The powertrain was solid enough to push the car down the road with reasonable authority, but with all that weight, it didn't take long to realize that the Electra was more of a land yacht than a sports sedan. The steering felt heavy, and any attempt to corner quickly was met with a lazy, lumbering response from the suspension, making it feel like the car was more interested in floating than actually turning. It was slow to react, and that weight made it less than ideal for anything requiring precision handling. Despite its lack of athleticism, the Electra 225 was all about the luxury experience. Inside, the car was lavishly appointed with plush seats that enveloped you in comfort. The dashboard was stylish, with a sweeping design that screamed 1960s elegance. And the whole cabin was designed for a long-haul comfort. Whether you were cruising down the freeway or just taking a leisurely drive around town, the Electra's focus was always on the comfort of its passengers. The 430 V8 engine, with its 360 horsepower, was more than enough to move the massive car along at a steady pace. But it wasn't about speed. It was about effortless cruising. You could glide down the highway at 70 miles per hour without breaking a sweat, feeling the road fade away beneath you as the car soaked up every bump and imperfection. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. The Electra 225 was meant to cruise, not race, but with that luxury came the reality of a car that was, quite frankly, absurdly big and hard to maneuver. At over 18 feet long, it was a boat, in every sense of the word, and parking could be an adventure of its own. The sheer size and weight of the Electra made it feel more like you were steering a barge than a sedan, and it was anything but agile when it came to tight spaces or quick maneuvers. In short, the Hessel 1967 Buick Electra 225 was the ultimate example of our luxury over performance. Its soft, cloud-like ride was a dream for passengers, and its massive V8 engine had enough power to get it down the road with authority, but it was a whizzy, monumental car, in both size and weight. For all its comfort and opulence, the Electra 225 was slow, sluggish, and about as far from sporty as you could get. It was a rolling palace, yes, but one that floated lazily over the road like it didn't have a care in the world. It was a Horsolina behemoth, and as comfortable as it was, it also embodied everything that was a bit ridiculous about 1960s American luxury cars. The 1978 Chrysler New Yorker Brougham was the quintessential luxury car of its time, built solely with comfort in mind. Chrysler's engineers weren't concerned with performance, handling, or anything remotely related to the thrill of driving. No, their primary goal was to create a car that felt like you were floating on a cloud. And in many ways, they succeeded. The seats were so thick and plush, they made your average memory foam mattress look like a piece of cardboard. The ride? A gentle, silky smooth glide, so soft you could almost forget you were driving. The problem, though, was that in their pursuit of ultimate comfort, Chrysler went a little too far. Let's start with the seats. These things were insane. Not in a good way, mind you, but in the sense that they were built for comfort, beyond reason. The upholstery felt like sitting on a giant, overstuffed, pillowy cloud, and you sank deep into them every time you took a seat. But after a while, the comfort became almost too much. You weren't driving a car anymore. You were sitting in an overstuffed armchair on wheels. It was as if the car was telling you, don't worry about the road, just relax. While that sounds great in theory, it turned the driving experience into something that felt almost completely disconnected from the reality of being on the road. Now let's talk about the suspension, because this is where things get especially ridiculous. Chrysler tuned the suspension to be so soft that it felt like the car was constantly on the verge of floating away. Every bump, every dip, every imperfection in the road disappeared. But the trade-off was a bizarre lack of road feel. It felt as though the car was detached from the road entirely, as if the tires weren't even touching the pavement. And while that might sound like an exaggeration, the sensation was almost eerie. At times, it felt like the New Yorker Brougham was more hovercraft than sedan, with no sense of ground connection. Driving it was more about the short experience of luxury than the act of driving itself. You didn't get the feeling of the car being in motion, at least not in the way you'd expect from a typical car. Instead, you were just being carried along in complete isolation, cut off from the road. You'd cruise down the highway at 70 miles per hour, and the only way you knew you were moving was the fact that the landscape was changing outside your window. The suspension absorbed everything. The shadowy rumble of the road, the vibration of the engine, and all of it was gone. It was as if the car was saying, don't worry, we'll get there. You just sit back and enjoy the ride. But here's the catch. In its effort to eliminate road feel, Chrysler lost something essential about the driving experience. The lack of feedback from the road made it hard to gauge what was actually happening beneath the car. You could barely feel the car's steering or its suspension dynamics, which left you with little to no connection to the experience of actually driving. That detached feeling was the exact opposite of the engaging drive many cars offer, even those built purely for comfort. And let's not forget the engine. The New Yorker Brougham wasn't exactly underpowered, but it wasn't trying to set any performance records either. The 360 V8 engine made just over 200 horsepower, which was more than enough to push the heavy luxury sedan down the road at a leisurely pace. But again, speed was not the priority here. It was about a smooth, effortless cruising. The car wasn't going to win any races, but it was more than happy to take you on a luxurious glide through the streets. All in all, the 1978 Chrysler New Yorker Brougham was without a doubt the embodiment of unabashed comfort. But in the pursuit of that goal, it missed out on everything else that makes driving enjoyable. It was a cushy monster that seemed to exist solely to carry you around without ever involving you in the process. It was a car that would have been perfect if all you wanted was a backward mobile lounge to get you from point A to point B. But if you ever wanted a car that felt connected to the road, that had any sort of driving engagement around, the New Yorker Brougham was a massive letdown. It wasn't just a car, it was more like a luxury escape pod. And while that may have sounded like heaven to some, it felt more like drifting aimlessly to others. The 1994 Lincoln Town Car Cartier Edition was an exercise in ultimate comfort. But it may have taken that mission a little too far. By the 90s, Lincoln had really perfected the art of the ultra-soft ride, and with the Cartier Edition, they pushed the limits of how cushy a car could get. The result? A car that rode like a waterbed on wheels and felt more like a lazy boy recliner than a proper sedan. While it might have been a dream for those who loved to float down the road, it was a nightmare for anyone who actually cared about feeling connected to the driving experience. The town car's air suspension was the heart of its ridiculously soft ride. It was engineered to absorb every bump, dip, and imperfection in the road, turning every journey into a smooth, cloud-like experience. In theory, this was wonderful, but in practice, it often felt like the car was bouncing more than gliding. Imagine driving down the highway, and with every small bump in the road, the car would give you that waterbed-like sway. It was like the car's suspension was trying to rock you to sleep rather than get you to your destination with any semblance of road connection. There were times when it felt less like driving a car and more like being gently bounced along the highway. The sensation was almost like a constant, floaty, bouncy motion, making you wonder if the engineers had intended for it to feel like a luxury boat on land. And then there were the seats. The front seats were like a pair of overstuffed armchairs that made you sink into them every time you sat down. You didn't just sit in the car, you were practically swallowed by it. The cushions were so soft that they almost seemed to wrap around you, leaving you feeling like you were in a recliner rather than a luxury sedan. It was so plush, in fact, that it sometimes felt like the car's entire design was built around one purpose: to pamper you. You could easily imagine an afternoon nap happening on a long road trip, especially given how the seats seemed to envelop you in a cocoon of comfort. But the problem with all this softness was the lack of any real engagement with the road. The car's handling was a blurred experience, with all the softness making you feel disconnected from the actual driving. The steering felt loose and unresponsive, with none of that direct feedback you'd expect from a car designed to give you any sense of control or precision. The weight of the car didn't help either, as it was a big sedan that, when coupled with that soft suspension, made tight corners feel like a struggle. You could practically imagine the car saying, "We're just here to cruise, not to fight with the road." So if you ever hoped to take the town car on a spirited drive through twisty roads, you'd be in for a major disappointment. As for the engine, the Town Car Cartier Edition came with a 4.6L V8, which was powerful enough for smooth cruising, but definitely not built for anything resembling speed or performance. At 190 horsepower, it was more than enough to get you down the highway at a comfortable pace, but it was never going to win any races. It was all about easy driving, not pushing the car to its limits. The transmission, too, was geared more towards smooth shifts rather than quick acceleration, so when you hit the gas, it wasn't for instantaneous power. It was for the ease of getting there. In short, the 1994 Lincoln Town Car Cartier Edition was a car built to pamper. It was a masterclass in comfort. Too much comfort, in fact. While it made long drives feel like lounging on a cloud, it came at the expense of the driving experience. The air suspension gave you that floating waterbed feeling. The overstuffed seats made it feel more like a living room than a car, and the handling felt disconnected and sluggish. For those who were looking for the ultimate relaxation on the road, this was a dream come true. But for anyone who wanted a bit of control, precision, or the feeling of actually driving, their car, the town car, was a bit of a joke. A luxury ship with all the right tools for lounging, but none for the drive itself.